So he wrote this script with Avery, and it put him on the map. And Avery started to do his own stuff as well, but Tarantino is the one who really launched. Tarantino became a superstar. He brought forth, in a way never seen before, the concept of the rock star director, in a similar way that the effects artists were in the 80s. He was a rock star, and I think to a lot of people he still is a rock star. And Pulp Fiction is largely to thank for that. If like, not to take anything away from Reservoir Dogs, because Reservoir Dogs, if someone came to me and said I like Reservoir Dogs more, which I'm not sure how I feel either yet, tell you the truth, between those two films, I would say, yeah, you know what, yeah. If someone said, hey, I like Pulp Fiction more, you're crazy, I'd be like, you know what, yeah. Because they were both amazing. But here's the thing, right? If he hadn't have come out with Pulp Fiction, his career could have fizzled. Because one movie's not enough. It's just not enough. In fact, I think that you're really as good as your third movie. I think, as a director. I always go back to like Alex Proyas when I'm thinking about this concept, because he was a director I was super into and super excited for where his career would go. So everyone talks about the sophomore slump. I don't think that's the case for directors, because, perfect example, The Crow, Alex Proyas, amazing debut. Still like an almost perfect film. It's amazing, that movie. If you check it out, if you haven't seen it in a while, see it again. It still holds up. It's amazing. Comes out with Dark City as a second film. That is like, wow, this is even better. This is, wow, what? This is like a precursor to The Matrix. No one had seen anything like this before. It didn't explode. It didn't do as well, but still, it was mind-blowing, and it was creative. The sets, it actually had the same tone and feel to The Crow. So you're thinking like, oh, I get this guy's voice. I get the kind of movies this guy wants to make, and what I have to look forward to. And then he comes out with iRobot with Will Smith. And yeah, it looks different. It's just an adaptation, and it's loaded with dated CGI. To where all of the effects in Dark City still look great. So it's like, what? You're just like, what happened? What happened? I feel the same way with about Doug Liman. There's a couple of directors who are just like, first two films, and then little by little, it's like, what's going on? It's just the decline of the quality, and it's sad. It's sad when it happens, but it didn't happen to Tarantino, and that's why Tarantino is relevant. And that shows really how he sustained himself creatively and just professionally. It shows how important the choices you make, the projects you're going to work on are, especially in the beginning. It's such a fragile thing, a career, a growing career. So going back to the soundtrack, this is the last thing I'll talk about. What a success that was. I mean, I had it. It was a big seller. It had a bunch of throwback songs I had never heard of. It got me for a short time, at least back then, into surf music. And it showed me a Chuck Berry song that I didn't know. I actually don't know how I didn't know that song. Everybody knows Johnny B. Good and things like that, but I had never heard this one. And it plays in the famous Twist contest with Vincent Vega and Uma Thurman, who is also really great in this movie, by the way. She would go on to work with Tarantino again in both Kill Bill films as the bride, an idea that they both came up with together on this film, on Pulp Fiction. This is the reason why those movies exist, that collaboration that they have. They made one song for this movie. I think that Tarantino was probably thinking about using the Girl, You're Gonna Be a Woman Soon song, and then they just decided to do a cover, hire a band to do a cover of it. But other than that, that's the only new version of a song in the entire soundtrack. The rest of it is just, everything, it ranges everything from surf music to country music to twist music to soul funk music in something like Jungle Boogie. And what's cool about the soundtrack is one of the first examples that I remember of the dialogue being interspersed in the CD that you'd buy, or the tape, or whatever you had at the time. So you see, it was almost like you were watching the movie again. You hear the line of dialogue, and the song would start, and they were scattered throughout the length of the album. That was the first time I remember that happening. And then after that, it was just the way that it all worked. Desperado was another favorite soundtrack of mine from back in the day. That had the dialogue intercut in with the music. Like a lot of soundtracks did it that way. Not all of them, but most of them did it. Some of them just would do one line, two lines. Other ones it was like watching the movie again. It was like before every song was a line of dialogue, and I loved it. I loved it more when they had the dialogue as a separate track, especially if it was a CD. I didn't like when they put, so some of the songs, some of the music in the Desperado soundtrack had it like it had it edited into the middle of the song, which I would have loved to have the option to have the song by itself, because I like to make like mixtapes and stuff like that back in the day. But yeah, it started that craze. It started a lot of craze. It started all of the imitators. Like there were the movies that imitated Dogs, Reservoir Dogs, and there were the movies that imitated this. And then there were the movies that just imitated Tarantino in general. There was a little bit of Dogs, a little bit of Pulp Fiction. That was the whole like Tarantino exploitation, whatever you want to call that, that subgenre that was spawned from it. And some of the movies were pretty decent. Doug Liman's second film, Go, was called at the time The Son of Pulp Fiction, because it was told in the same anthology format with the stories that intersect with one another. And it had some slick dialogue, even a few gangster type characters. And then you had movies like Lovin' at 45, Thursday, Truth and Consequences, New Mexico, which I believe was Kiefer Sutherland's directorial debut. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was insane. And it was just obvious that these movies weren't as good as what they were inspired from, but they were obviously something specific, something unique, and just a new, cool exploitation subgenre. And we had that, in the 90s. Something new was born. Where else can you say that? You can't say that now. I mean, very rarely is there something new that's born. I mean, as far as subgenres, and that's what we had in the 90s. I don't think it's impossible. I think you could use a couple examples. Even you could say like, oh, what about like found footage? That was even in the 90s. That was born in the late 90s. Japanese horror was born in the late 90s. I don't know. After the 90s, I can't think of anything that's really like a subgenre that was born. I'm sure it exists, but even if it does, man, you're talking like 10-1, like 10 examples from the 90s. Maybe you could come up with one now, if that. And it's pretty sad, but whatever. It is what it is.